Nothing so determines the trajectory of our children into life. Nothing so determines their view of life, their perspective, their odds for success relationally. Nothing impacts that more than their relationship with us as their parents. Nothing so impacts the trajectory and the direction of a child's life. Nothing has greater impact than their relationship with their parents. In this series, we've said there are 3 questions we have to constantly ask as parents at every stage along the parenting pathway. One is, what am I doing to advance my child's relationship with God? One is, what am I doing to influence my child's relationship with those outside the home? And the question we're going to ask today and focus on today is, what am I doing to enhance my child's relationship with me? Because your child's relationship with you, regardless of where you are in the parenting journey, that relationship will do more to set them up for success or failure relationally than any other relationship and just about anything else that comes into their life. The premise for this whole series is that basically as adults, here's what we know about ourselves. We know that there's 3 things that have had a profound impact on us: our relationships, the choices we've made, and the things we've experienced. And the choices that we've made and the things that we experience, for the most part, not totally, but for the most part, have been impacted by certain key relationships. And those key relationships are our relationships with our parents, our relationship or lack of relationship with God, and our relationship with others. And what we've said is that our relationship with God and our relationship with others has been and will be profoundly impacted by our relationship, or has been profoundly impacted by our relationship with our parents. There's a sense in which our parents had 3 dials in front of them. A relationship with them dial, a dial that reflected our relationship with God, and a dial that reflected our relationship with others. And as we were brought up and as we grew up, our parents dialed us up and dialed us down in some of those areas. They may have dialed you up high in their relationship with them, or they may have been absentee parents and dialed you down. They may have been a Christian home where they dialed God in, or they may have been a non-Christian home where they dialed God down. It was a situation where they dialed in and dialed out certain people in your life. You had a lot of time with your grandparents. You had no time with your grandparents. You had too much time with the girl next door, not quite enough time with the girl next door. That your parents basically influenced the degree to which you experience relationship in these 3 areas, and you've been shaped by that. In fact, we said in the very first week, if you're not sure about this, if you would think back, if your parents could go back and remix some of those relationships, you might be a different person. You may have become a Christian earlier. You may not have made some of the mistakes you've made. If they dialed some people in, dialed some people out, if they had dialed themselves in, if Dad had dialed himself in. And the good news is this, and yet the challenging news is this, that as parents, we have our hands on the dials. That we have an opportunity to dial us in, dial us out of their lives, dial God in, dial God out of their lives, dial some other influences in, dial some other people out of their life. And that mix has incredible impact in terms of what our kids experience and the choices that they make. Today we're just going to talk about one of those dials, your relationship with your kids. Your relationship with your kids. Now, the challenge in an audience like this is that there are so many different stages of parenting represented. I mean, we got some parents who just had, we got some pregnant moms for the first time. We got some, preschool. We got children, middle school, teenagers, college students, singles. Your kids are grown. They're married. They're gone. You got all these stages. So there's no way today for me to sit here and tell you how to have a relationship with your child based on all these different stages, but I'm going to give you a couple of tips at the end. What I want to do more than anything else today is to motivate you to re-engage or to continue to engage in pursuing a relationship with your child, because although you know there are some good reasons to do that, there are 2 reasons I bet you either don't know or maybe you underestimate the significance of. In other words, if I were to ask you, should you have a relationship with your child, everybody would say yes. If I were to say to you, is it important? Everybody would say yes. If I were to say, why is it important? Everybody could come up with some reasons. But I want to give you 2 reasons today that I think are so unbelievably compelling, that regardless of where you are in the process, and regardless of how busy you've gotten, and regardless of how you may have relegated that responsibility to mom or relegated relegated to dad. I hope today as a result of this message that all of us leave here unbelievably motivated to re-engage and to not make the mistake of our culture. Because as we said at the very first time we met and talked about this, the trend of culture is to make our children experience rich and relationally poor. Experience rich, everybody gets to the game, everybody gets to gymnastics, everybody's going to get into college, everybody's going to get a tutor, everybody's going to we're going to go to Europe, we're going to make sure you travel, we want you to be a patrol, we want our kids to be experience rich, but consequently, oftentimes they are relationship poor because we're so busy making sure they have experiences that we never have dinner together. We have to cut vacation short. Dad's working so hard to provide that he doesn't get home to have, spend time with the kids. That mom's so busy driving them around and shuffling them around, there's no time for conversation. And at the end of the day, if our children are experience rich and relationally poor, we have robbed them of what will set them up relationally for success later on in life. So today, for a few minutes, I just want to spend some time trying to motivate you to continue to engage, to re-engage, to ask the question, what can I do in light of where my kids are? What can I do to enhance my relationship with them because of what's at stake? Two huge things that are at stake. Number one, when it matters most, and we'll throw these up on the screen for you, when it matters most, the quality of your relationship with your children will determine the weight of your influence. When it matters most, we'll talk about that in a minute, when it matters most, the quality of your relationship with your kids will determine the weight of your influence. Now, you don't need a verse for this. You can simply think about your relationship with your parents. You see, the quality of your relationship with your parents right now determines the weight of their influence in your life. If you have no relationship with your father because he didn't grow up in your home and he left and went off and started a second or third family, if there's no relationship, if suddenly he were to call you up and start giving you advice, how seriously would you take the advice? There would be so much of an emotional wall. He has no influence in your life because he has no relationship with you. You may be on the other end of the spectrum. You may be 30 or 40 or 50 years old, and your parents continue to have influence in your life. Why? Because you have a relationship with them. Again, the quality of the relationship results in the weight of the influence. And here's what you know and what we all need to remember as parents. We always want to be sitting in the seat of influence with our children, not simply through middle school and adolescence, but when they begin to make the most important decisions of their lives, we want to be in a place of influence. And what gives you influence and what gives me influence is the significance and the health of our relationship with them. Now, you hear that and you go, well, that's so obvious, I don't even need to write that down. But here's why this is an incredibly important principle that we easily lose sight of. And I want to try to explain to you why some of you may have lost influence early in the lives of your children. And at the end, I'm going to give you a clue as to how to maybe get some of it back. You see, when our kids first come into our lives and first come into our world, our influence doesn't hinge upon our relationship with them. We have a size and position advantage, don't we? The reason we have great influence in the lives of our kids has nothing to do with the quality of the relationship at all. Nothing to do with quality of relationship. It has everything to do with size and position. I can pick them up and I can put them somewhere. I can buckle them in. I can strap them in. I can make them stay in their room. I can lock the door. I can make them eat that food. I have the size and position advantage. I'm bigger and I'm dad. I'm bigger and I'm mom. But the problem is, and we all know this, but we've missed the dynamic of this. Eventually that goes away, doesn't it? It's been a long time since my mom picked me up and put me in the back seat and strapped me in. She couldn't get me in the back seat now if her life depended on it. If it was basically about position and, size, right? I could put my mom in the back seat and strap her in more easily than she could put me in, right? Because she sees size and position went away a long time ago. Here's the catch. Here's the principle. Here's the dynamic. In our parenting, if we do not quickly shift while we have the advantage of size and position, if we do not quickly shift and transition to influencing because of relationship, then the temptation will be, and here's maybe what explains what happens in your own home or happened when you were growing up, if we don't make the transition, we will continue to try to influence from the position of power, of size and position. We'll try to continue to influence them from size and position long after our size and position is no longer a factor. And if you continue to try to parent from that vantage point when no longer do you have that leverage, you will erode what is most important, which is your relationship with your children. And the temptation, and haven't seen this because I don't have teenagers, but having dealt with hundreds of teenagers and hundreds of families through the years, I know this to be the case. There is always the temptation when our children begin to move beyond the place where size and position is the factor, and size and position gives us leverage. When kids begin to move beyond that, if mom and dad have not invested deeply in the relationship, their temptation is to continue to push the size and position button long after it's effective. Except they don't say, son, I'm bigger. They say, son, you want the car? You want to graduate? You want somebody to pay? Hey, come back here. Hey, do you want some? In other words, see, I'm not bigger physically, but I got some stuff you don't have that you need. And the temptation is to continue to try to weigh in an area that doesn't have significance. And what happens is we unintentionally erode the relationship. And the tragedy is, it's when they need our influence the most that oftentimes we have the least because we didn't make the transition. See, here's the ironic thing about the whole principle. Do you know when your kids need your influence the most? They need it the most when they make the decisions that are going to matter the most. They need our influence the most when they're choosing who they date, when they're choosing how far is too far, when they choose where they're going to live, when they choose who they're going to marry, when they choose how they're going to raise their kids, when they choose their college major. I mean, all the major decisions in life, by the time our kids start making those decisions, size and position is almost completely irrelevant. It's all about the health and the depth of the relationship. And if we have not done our homework, we lose what is most important to us as parents in those critical times. We lose influence. And you see, we live in a culture where, come on, man, we're so busy. And maybe you came up in a home where you weren't nurtured. And somewhere along the way, you know this isn't right, and you didn't adopt this, systematically, and it wasn't intentional. But somewhere along the way, you grade yourself based on how, what kind of experiences you give your kids. You grade yourself on, hey, they're eating and living indoors, and hey, I've got a college savings fund, and hey, don't I provide, and don't I. But the day will come when you would trade all of that in for influence. And if where there is no relationship, there will be no influence. And your temptation, I understand your temptation will be to keep trying to go back to size and position. But not only will it not work, some of you know this from experience, pushing those buttons and yanking on those levers will continue to erode what you want the most, which is influence in the lives of your kids. Do you know what happens? I've seen it all the time. Maybe you've experienced this. When parents realize they're losing influence and there's not a relationship foundation there to influence through relationship, they resort to guilt. They resort to bribery. Some of you who are adults see this with your parents now. There was no relationship and suddenly they want a relationship with you and you're not even that motivated. So they use guilt and bribery. We never see you anymore. We haven't seen the grandkids in, over 36 hours? When are you going to call? When? And guilt. And how do you feel? Do you feel endeared at that moment? Do you know what your whole strategy becomes at that point? It becomes, what can I do for my mom and dad so I can quit feeling guilty? Or it's bribery. Hey, your mom and I have something for you, but you need to come over here and get it. We got a little something for the kids, but you need to come over here and get it. Hey, we were thinking about maybe giving you, but you, and all of us. And you know what happens? And then your whole perspective on your parents, isn't this true? Is how do I quit feeling guilty and how do I get what they have? How do I quit feeling guilty? How do I get what they have? How do I quit feeling guilty? Is that a relationship? See, that's the antithesis of relationship. Those are two things that continue to erode a relationship. But here's the deal. There will come a day in my life and in your life when no matter where we are with our kids, we are going to want a relationship. We're going to want influence. And if we have not done our homework and transitioned well from size and position to relationship, then we will be tempted, maybe like your parents have been tempted, to grasp for those things. Not only do they not work, but they continue to alienate us and erode the relationship. You see, pursuing and enhancing relationship with your children, it's not really optional. It's setting them up. It's setting you up. and it's setting you up to potentially lose what you're going to want most, influence in the lives of your children. Now, the interesting thing is there's actually a verse in the Bible that points to this dynamic. This verse is not about this, but this verse illustrates the importance of this dynamic. It's found in the book of Ephesians. The Apostle Paul is writing to some Christians, and he makes his point, and it's just a powerful verse, and there's a powerful couple of words. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, if you have your Bibles. We're going to put this up on the screen. It's the verse we looked at when we launched this series, when we talked about our relationship with our kids. It's addressed to fathers, but the principle certainly applies to fathers and to mothers, and he points to a dynamic that we have all experienced in our current homes and experienced in our growing up homes. And here's what he says, Ephesians 6, verse 4. Fathers, and I think fathers and mothers. Here's what he says. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Your Bible might say, do not provoke your children to wrath, or do not anger your children. Let me talk about that word a little bit. To exasperate or provoke your children to wrath, here's what that looks like. It means that you have abused your position and you've abused your size in order to get what you want from your children, and in doing so, you've just angered them or exasperated them. That you've abused size and position. That because you're bigger and because you can always win and because you can always get your way, that even when you're wrong, you end up being right. And even when you're right, you express your rightness in such a way as to frustrate your kids. The other day, we were having dinner, and we were trying to make Garrett eat something he didn't want. He's 9. And do you remember that? Can't you remember that as a child? I can still remember sitting at the table with green beans, looking at them. Everybody's gone. The sun has gone down. I'm going to sit there till I eat them. Do you remember this? You're going to sit there till you eat those green beans. I can remember putting ketchup on them. I can remember the smell. It was like, I will be here forever because I cannot eat, And as much as you remember that, there I am as a parent. Garrett, I forget what it was we're trying to get him to eat. Anyway, so Garrett put some in his mouth, and he spits it out, and he gags. Okay, deal. And when he gagged, his eyes all watered up. We can all remember this. And why do we do this to our kids? You never do that to somebody who came to your house for dinner. Are you going to try that? You need to have some. Anyway. So and the goal, of course, is to teach them to like it. So it's not working. So anyway, he gags, his eyes water up, but the expression on his face was so funny, all the rest of us started laughing at him. I mean, I almost fell out of my seat. It was just his face was contorted, there's eyes and his whole body. So we start laughing. We were all laughing, all 4 of us, and he got mad. Well, I guess so. He's over there in pain, about to throw up, and we're just laughing. Well, he got so mad, he did something. I don't even tell you what it is. He did something none of my kids have ever done. It's like it's the number one thing you just don't do. And he just hauled off and did this thing. I told him this morning I wouldn't tell you what he did. Well, this is like Major Sandra looked at me and I looked at her. This is the kind of thing where you just jump up and you yank them up and you discipline them. So I've got all this emotion like, how dare you do that? At the same time, I'm going, I think we set him up. And it was very, very awkward. And I didn't do anything right then, as though I was upset, and he was upset, and then he's crying, and everything's kind of falling apart. But you know what I'd done? I'd exasperated him. He could not win. I set him up to fail. And then I was about to punish him for reacting in a way that was disrespectful, that I had set him up to react. And later I went to him, I said, Garrett, remember the deal? Yeah, I said, I am so sorry. That's my fault. I set you up. Now, what you did, is absolutely wrong. But you know what? I know you did it because I made you mad. We talked about it. But I just exasperated him. I leveraged my size and position to put him in a no-win situation. Now, listen, as adults, we've all been in that situation with other adults, right? In fact, you may live with someone like that, okay? And I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, here's what I mean by exasperating. You can't win. I mean, they talk faster than you, they're quicker than you, they're smarter than you, they've always got an angle, and at the end of every conversation, you are so exasperated because you know you're right, but you just can't convince them, and you're always a little bit off balance in the relationship. Maybe it's somebody you work with or play tennis with, or maybe even someone you consider a friend, but there's always a sense where you just can't, they're not going to let you win. And if you're in marriage like that, you go to a counselor or a friend and you tell what's going on, and the counselor or friend looks at you and says, is that it? And you're thinking, oh, you got to be there. I mean, I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're in the midst of it, this person just, oh. Now, let me ask you something. in an adult relationship like that, what does that do to the relationship? Is that like, oh man, we're making progress and this is positive? No. It is just one of the most frustrating, no-win, just exasperating. And the Apostle Paul says, you know what, parents, if you're not careful because you're bigger and you're smarter and you talk faster and you got all the money on your side, you got everything on your side. In other words, you can always win against your kids. But if you're not careful, you will provoke them to anger. You will exasperate your kids. And here's what he doesn't say that we know is true. And relationally, you're just chipping away. And in the real world, they may always end up doing just what you want them to do. But when the day of transition comes, when size and position are no longer an issue, and it's all about influencing them from the standpoint of relationship, you lose because you have no leverage. And you will be tempted to keep trying to find ways to be bigger and to be mom and to be bigger and to be dad. But you will lose what you need most, influence, because you didn't lay the groundwork for relationship. Now look what he says, because there's a contrast. He says, don't provoke your children to wrath. He says, or exasperate your children, but, and look at this, and there's in my Bible it says instead, but in Greek is a little word that's but. He says, but instead, bring them up, and that's one Greek word, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now last week, Reggie talked about the training and instruction of the Lord, so I don't want to go there, but I want to talk about this little contrast word. He says, don't exasperate them, but bring them up. The little Greek word for bring them up is the word nourish. It means to nourish or to replenish or to build into. It's used in other parts in the New Testament to talk about how God works with the church to raise up and to nourish and to invest into and to speak into the church. He says your parenting style or your approach to your kids isn't to leverage your size and position and to overkill on the fact that you can get them to do what you want them to do. He says you're to take the angle of to be a nourisher, a nurturer, a replenisher, a partner, a speak into, a move them along, a guide, a coach. This is a very, very relationally rich word. And the Apostle Paul in this one little phrase contrasts what so oftentimes happens in our home. And he says, if you take the whole verse, here's the idea. Your best bet for preparing them for the future, that is training them up in the admonition of the Lord, your best bet for training and preparing them for the future will come through relational channels, not I'm bigger and more powerful than you channels. In other words, if you are really concerned about setting your children up for success in the future, if you're really concerned about training them and preparing them for what's to come, then as soon as we can, we've got to move off of the I'm bigger and I'm dad and I'm bigger and I'm mom and to begin to influence them through the richness and the help of relationship, because that's our leverage point from this point on, because ultimately and eventually it is the health of our relationship that impacts the weight of our influence. He says, don't be drawn into thinking that as long as I can control the outcome of their behavior, things are fine. He says, oh no, don't exasperate them. Don't grade yourself by the win. Grade yourself by the nature and depth of the relationship. Now, let me say something real quick to those of you who have middle schoolers and high school kids. I don't have any, so this is all drawn from experience. In fact, after first service, 3 of our elders came back to pray with me before this service. And these are guys who've raised their kids and done extraordinarily well. And they said to me, right on, right on, right on. And I looked at each of them because I know they're kids, and I said to each one of them, unbelievable job, great example. You are the reason I feel like I can get up with confidence and say the things I say, not because of my experience, but because of watching men like you who've raised your kids. And here's what I want to say to those of you with middle school and high school. You're in that transition period. You're still a little bit bigger. You still got the money. You still control the car keys. You still, you got that whole thing going on. But at the same time, you already know that has less and less and less leverage in their life. Now is the time to get off both of those rails. And as soon as you can, to begin to parent from the standpoint of the richness and the wealth of the relationship as opposed to I'm bigger than you are. That doesn't mean you don't discipline. It doesn't mean that you finance their insanity. I mean, you got to make some hard decisions from time to time. But the fact is, the day of I'm bigger and I'm mama is coming to an end. And the sooner you can transition, the better for you. You say, well, Andy, if I do that, it won't work. I know what you'd say. It won't work. And I would say to you, what do you mean it won't work? And you would say to me, well, it doesn't work because I can't get them to do what I want them to do. To which I would say to you, that's not the goal anymore. The goal anymore is to maintain relationships so you can maintain influence. You can't control them anyway. And as long as you stay in the I'm bigger than you and I'm mom of, perspective, you just eat away and erode the relationship that sets you up for influence later. It's not simple. It's not easy, but it is a principle. It's a dynamic, and you dare not ignore it lest you pay dearly, because they're on the verge of their most important decisions. And you've got to have influence. Being right doesn't equal influence. Being right and being able to say, I told you so, is worthless in their world. It's all about the nature of the relationship. And I tell you why I'm so passionate about that. I've seen so many times, especially with Dad, I pick on Dad on Mother's Day, but I guess I shouldn't pick on mothers on Mother's Day either. But I've seen so many times when Dad was content to be a provider in his own kind of way, and he wasn't nurtured as a kid, so he's not a nurturer, but he grades himself on, hey, we're all eating and living indoors, and everything's great, And all of a sudden, middle school and high school comes, and Dad suddenly wants to plop down in the life of his son and start saying, hey, you better watch out, and why don't you? And his dad and his son's just not even listening. And he's thinking, what happened? What's wrong? I'm right, Andy. And people have brought their kids in to see me and, tell them I'm right. And I sit there and I think, you are right, but that's not really the point anymore. And as long as being right is the point, you miss the point, and you don't have what you need most. You don't have influence because you haven't invested in the relationship during the transitional time when they outgrew you. And being a dad is just like saying, I'm a category, I'm a category, I'm a category. I'm your mom. That means I'm a category. It doesn't mean anything anymore. All I'm saying is this. This isn't simple. It's not scientific. There's not 1, 2, 3. This will happen. We know that. It's time that you ask the question, what can I do? What can I do to enhance my relationship with my children so that when the day comes that I want to be the chief influencer in their life, I'm the chief influencer not because I'm your dad and I'm bigger and I've got the purse, but because there's a relationship of trust and respect, and I'm the person they would come to in the times of big decisions. That's the first one. The second one, and I only spent about 5 minutes on this. The second reason you need to do everything you can to enhance your relationship with your child is this. Your relationship with your children is what sets them up for future relationships. Your relationship with your children will impact the quality of their future relationships. Let me say it this way, and then I'll explain. An investment in your relationship with your child, this is huge. An investment in your relationship with your child is like investing in all of their future relationships. When you invest in your relationship with your child, it is like investing in all of their future relationships. Let me explain why. Because your investment of relationally in the life of your child does more to establish emotional health for them than anything else. When you invest in your relationship with your child, you are investing in their emotional health. And emotionally healthy people generally have healthy relationships, and emotionally unhealthy people have a very difficult time maintaining healthy relationships. You know that from experience. You know that from your marriage. You know that from watching your brothers and sisters. Emotionally healthy people are able to have healthy relationships. Emotionally unhealthy people struggle relationally. And there is no greater factor in the development of your child's emotional health than their relationship with you. In fact, your relationship with them and their moral choices determine their emotional health, all things being equal. Your relationship with your child and their moral choices determine their emotional health, and your relationship with them greatly impacts their moral choices. That's why investing in your relationship with your child, it's not just a nice thing to do. It's not an add-on. It's not just a Christian thing to do. When you invest in your relationship with them, you're investing in all their future relationships. And here's this is the strange thing. You see, parents are constantly complaining about their children's relationships out there. And parents are constantly impacted by their children's relationships out there. And yet parents are often hesitant to train or to model what it means to be in a healthy relationship. It doesn't make any sense. You will forever be impacted by your children's relationships, who they date, who they marry, how they raise their kids, who they work with. You're going to be forever impacted by those relationships. The greatest investment you can make in those future relationships is a healthy relationship now and along the way with your child. This is why I date my daughter. She's 7. We go on dates all the time. You know why? Because I want her to know what to expect from a guy. And I want the expectations to be real high. Now, where else is she going to learn that? I want them to be so high that when some idiot comes along, she's just disgusted. And she can come home and say, that was just disgusting. I'm like, great, let's don't do that again. Where else is she going to learn that? Where does my daughter get her expectations for how men should treat her? Where does she get that at 7? There's only one place, and you're looking at it. And if I abdicate that responsibility, hey, everybody's eating and living indoors, everything's fine, then I set her up for relational difficulties, which sets me up for relational difficulties, which sets another generation of Stanleys up for relational difficulties. I've got my hand on the dial. What an incredible opportunity and responsibility. Every time, every investment you make in your relationship with your children, you're investing in all their future relationships. Don't you already know? Don't we know that from the way that we were raised? Of course we do. Now, 2 things and then we're done. Do you know what it takes to have a great relationship with your child? It's 2 things. No matter what stage of life, and if we looked at preschoolers, we could give a bunch of information, in high school, a bunch of information. But across the board, 2 things you cannot ignore. They want to feel accepted, and they got to have your time. They've got to feel accepted, and they got to have your time. Now, I don't know how that looks when they're in college. I don't know how that looks when they're in high school. I know how it looks when they're in elementary school. They've got to feel. See, you're not going to feel connected to someone you don't feel accepted by. And moms and dads, we have to be so very careful that in our disciplining and in our kidding and in our chiding and in our busy and do this and do that, we don't subtly reject our children. And they'll still say, I love you, and they'll still love to see us come home at night. But if they're constant messages of rejection, we've eroded the relationship. There have to be massive doses of acceptance. And if you weren't here during the Life Rules series, you need to get that CD we did on acceptance, talk all about acceptance, and they got to have time. You cannot avoid those 2 things regardless of what age and stage of life. So if you're somebody sitting here today and you say, you know what, I need to do more to enhance my relationship with my child, that's your starting place. What can I do to communicate unconditional acceptance? And what can I do to give them more of my time? You can't have a long-distance relationship with your child. You can't depend on quality time, because quality time with a child is totally unpredictable. As Reggie often says, you need a quantity of quality times. If you're here today and you say, you know what, Andy, I think you're exactly right, and I wish I'd heard that 5 years ago. Wish I'd heard that 10 years ago. Wish I'd heard that when my children were born. I feel like maybe it's too late. You're exactly right. I don't have influence. And I don't have much of a relationship. And you're right, I find myself using guilt. I find myself using money. I find myself using all kinds of stuff. And I just want back in. How do I get back in? How do I regain what I've lost? 2 things. Number 1, there's no guarantee that you ever will have it back. I got to tell you that. Because it's up to your children. It's up to your adult children, your college-age kids. It's up to your kids as to whether or not they let you back in. But I can tell you your best bet. And it may not make any sense to you, so you just think about it. The only way to get back in, probably, is to serve your way back in. You can't family tree your way back in. Do you realize I'm here and you're here? You know? You can't, let's rehearse history your way back in. I took care of you through, yeah, fine, click, I knew that, See, if you want genuine relationship with someone that has shut you out because you shut them out or for whatever reason, there's really only one way back in when it comes to family. You've got to serve. You say, serve? Good grief, I served them for 18 years. I know, I'm not saying this is fair. I'm saying the only way to potentially get them to crack the door to let you back in is to serve your way back in. It is very difficult to keep the door closed on relationship to someone who consistently serves us with no apparent motive other than simply to serve us. Now, it's kind of an academic sermon. You know, even last night I was looking at it going, I don't know if that's even a sermon. That's just some random thoughts on it's true, but because, you know, and here's why. You know what? All of that aside, if I can just personally for a minute, do you know what my real motivation is to maintain and develop a relationship with my kids, just selfishly? I mean, all that's good for them, helps set them up for the future, and they need influence, and they need dad to tell them what to do and set them up for their future healthy marriages and stuff. But do you know what my base selfish motivation is why I want to maintain a relationship with my kids? Because that's the goal of parenting anyway, isn't it? I mean, isn't the goal when they're grown and gone that they would want to come spend time with me? Isn't that the goal? I mean, I thought it was. This is what Sandra and I said is the goal. You say that's selfish. I don't care. That's the goal. I mean, when Christmas rolls around and they're married and gone, I want them to load up everybody they need to load up and come back to Alpharetta, Georgia and be with me, not because it's Christmas and you do, Dad, and not because I say, hey, I got you a new minivan in the driveway, but you got to come pick it up, you know. I want them to load up and come because they can't wait to get back to Alpharetta to see me and Sandra. And the only way to enjoy the reward of parenting then is to make some strategic, consistent investments now. Because I think the bullseye on the target is that when our kids don't have to come home, that they want to come home. And that's not about being right, and that's not about guilt, and that's not about having a bigger checking account. It's about something that started a long time ago when we successfully transitioned from I'm bigger and I'm dad to I love you and I accept you and I am standing here by you and I'm going to be your biggest fan and I'm going to be your coach. I'm on your team. And that's why wherever you are, I want to encourage you, re-engage in the process. No matter how far away your kids live, re-engage in the process and ask yourself the question, what can I do? What can I do now at this stage of life to enhance my relationship with my kids? When I met Sandra, I pretty soon after that met her dad. That was interesting. Bob is his name. For a long time it was Mr. Walker, you know. And one of the things I noticed about Bob is he always had a shirt with a pocket. And, you know, generationally that was kind of typical, but he always had something in his pocket and it wasn't a bunch of pens. He always had a little spiral ring notebook, flip little notebook, and it was always open. You could tell by looking at it across the top that it wasn't closed, it was open. And I thought maybe it's his to-do list. And I learned pretty quickly that this was a stage when Sandra was at Georgia Tech and her sister was in nursing school and her brother was at Auburn. They're all in college now, kind of grown and gone. But in his pocket, he carried a little flip spiral ring notebook that had their schedules on it. He always knew where they were, and he knew what class they were in. He knew what they were doing. That was his way of staying engaged in their life. Not meddling, just staying engaged. And as adults, they remember that. That little picture in their minds of dad with his spiral ring notebooks communicates volumes to them about a father who was on the latter end of the whole parenting thing, but who said, you know what? I still love you. I'm still involved. I'm standing by if you need me. And you know what? Every Christmas, those three kids cannot wait to load up the truck and get with Jack, Jackie, and Bob for Christmas. They just did it right all along the way. And someday I'll tell you the story of the financial sacrifice Bob made in order to be the dad, to be engaged. And now they're enjoying the rewards of that kind of relationship. See, that's what I want for me and my kids. That's what you want for you and your kids. And some of you are at a place where you can do it right the first time. Some of you are going to have to play a little catch up. Some of you think it's too late, but I'm telling you, wherever you are, ask yourself the question, what can I do now to enhance my relationship with my kids? What can I do now to get myself to where it's all about influencing from the standpoint of relationship, not simply bigger and I'm mom or I'm dad? What can I do to serve my way back in to their life? Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, for some of us this is encouraging. We're glad we heard it. For others of us, it's a little perplexing. Maybe for some today it's like, it's too late. would you please give each of us wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard? And Father, for those that feel like they're out, give them the self-control they need to just begin to slowly and gently serve and to serve and to serve. And if there's never a change, for them to know that at this stage in their life they did all that they could to regain a place in the life and the heart of their children. Father, thank you for modeling that for us, that you sent your Son to this world, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many, and now we worship him. Father, for those of us on the other end where we're still trying to figure it out, give us the wisdom to know how to engage each of our unique, individually gifted children at a level where there's relationship. Father, for those who have middle schoolers and teenagers and it's just a fog right now, Father, give them wisdom to know what to do so when they come out on the other side, there's still influence, there's still relationship. Thank you for being our Heavenly Father and for teaching us so much even in that. And it's in your Son, Jesus' name, that we pray. Amen.